Welcome to the Book of Mormon Evidence Podcast with host Rod Meldrum. This week's Come Follow Me supplemental study is Lesson 37, 3 Nephi 8 through 11. Arise and come forth unto me. In part 1 of this episode, Rod Meldrum discusses and documents in great detail the destruction that occurred to North America at the time of Christ's death. Rod gives us several answers as to how this incredible destruction could have occurred. He also discusses the Book of Mormon as a type and shadow of what we may have ahead of us, especially in light of the 2 solar eclipses crisscrossing North America by 2024.
Welcome, everybody, to the Come Follow Me 2020 podcast. We are excited about this week. We're going to be talking about, when I say we, it's actually going to be myself. I had the opportunity several years ago, back in 2011, actually, to do some really fun research involving the destruction that happened around the time of Christ's death. That's what we're going to be talking about. So we're actually talking about, this is lesson number 37. This is 3 Nephi, chapters 8 through 11. This is when Christ comes to the Nephites. This is what happens before he actually gets there. So we're going to be talking about that. I'm excited about this. This is, again, I want to just reiterate, this is the Come Follow Me manual here. We're expecting that you've probably already gone through the manual part of it. And this is going to be supplemental material. I think you're going to find this absolutely fascinating. I've had many different people who have said that this is probably one of the biggest game changers, one of the biggest paradigm shifters that they've ever seen when it comes down to the Book of Mormon information and what we've all kind of thought and things that have been held out as being this is what happened compared to actually what may have actually happened. So I want to set this up a little bit. Go back just a little bit. Over the last couple of weeks, we've been talking about the ramp up to this, and so want to do that for just a second. I'm going to go actually back to Alma chapter 60, verse 29, and I want to focus on this portion right here. Now, this is a letter that actually Moroni was writing to the governor of the land, Pahoran, and this is in that letter, his epistle to Pahoran. And basically what he says, behold, it is time, yea, the time is now at hand, that except ye do bestir yourselves in the defense of your country and your little ones, the sword of justice doth hang over you, yea, and it shall fall upon you and visit you even to your utter destruction. And I think that is an important aspect of it. When it says your country and your little ones, those are 2 things that I think that we really need to have understood, that these 2 areas are. This is what Captain Moroni is saying, that if you don't basically engage in fighting for your country and engage in fighting for your little ones, my assumption is that is your children. And as I look at as things are today in our time frame, I find it interesting that these are 2 areas that I think that we need to really be engaged in. Basically, engaged in the fight for freedom within our country, and also for the lives of our little ones, whether that be human trafficking or abortion or what have you. I think that is really an apropos statement. So going back here for just another second here, we're going to go now to Helaman, jump up to Helaman in chapter 6, and this is verses 37 and 38. We've already covered this, but I just want to reiterate kind of what's going on here in these chapters. It says in verse 38, it says, it came to pass, on the other hand, that the Nephites did build them up and support them. This is talking about the Gadianton robbers. In fact, maybe go back to verse 37. It says, it came to pass that the Lamanites did hunt the band of robbers of Gadianton. They did preach the word of God among the more wicked part of them, insomuch that this band of robbers was utterly destroyed from among the Lamanites. So the Lamanites had gotten rid of this band of robbers, but on the other hand, the Nephites did build them up and support them, beginning at the more wicked part of them, until they had overspread all the land of the Nephites, and had seduced the more part of the righteous, until they had come down to believe in their works, partake in their spoils, and to join with them in their secret murders and combinations. And I think it's a big warning for us in our days not to let those Gadianton robber secrets and those secret combinations, let them become a part of us. that we need to realize, number one, who they are, be able to identify who they are and what those secret combinations were. Basically, really, it comes down to free stuff. When it comes down to it, whenever you're trying to enslave people, one of the best things you can do is to offer them free stuff. And that has happened time and time in the scriptures, and also that's how drug dealers do it. They offer them free heroin or whatever for a certain period of time, and then when they get them addicted to it, then they basically say, okay, now you have to stop paying. You have to start paying for this stuff, and that's how they do it. And so they would do it secretly. They would have murders and so forth, and they would not rat each other out basically or tell on each other to try to avoid being brought to justice in their civilization. So the Nephites, basically, they were all part of that. They were all kind of in on the spoils, if you will, of doing this. Now, then we go to Helaman chapter 6, 39 and 40. It says, and thus they did obtain the sole management of the government. So their whole purpose of this was to gain control of the government. Why would people want to do that? Because the government is where you can get the most power. It's where you can exert your power kind of in a legal way that would be usurping otherwise the freedoms of the people. Insomuch that they did trample under their feet and smite and rend and turn their backs upon the poor and the meek and the humble followers of God. As I look at that, who the poor and the meek, as I look at what's going on in our country today, the people who are really taking the brunt of these riots and shutdowns are the poor. You don't see the governors or the people in government taking pay cuts and not being able to make their mortgages. It's usually the working class people who are having the most issues with trying to make it during this COVID shutdown brought on by the government and this virus. And so, in fact, it's interesting. Just recently, one of the city managers, basically, or the mayors of one of the big cities in the United States, and this is in Chicago, it's after literally now months of rioting and people being killed in her city. The rioters started to get close to her house, and she decided, oh, you know what, we're going to have police. You know, they wanted to defund the police and actually abolish the police department there in Chicago. She was all for that, but when it came down to the rioters going by her house and her neighborhood, then she wanted to make dang good and sure that those police were there for protection, because she said, you know, it's my right to have protection. But apparently she doesn't think it's the right of the poor and the meek in Chicago to have that kind of protection. And thus we see that they were in an awful state and ripening for an everlasting destruction. And that is, I think, kind of where we find ourselves now. If the Book of Mormon is a parallel history of the United States of America, then really these chapters that we've just been covering and until we get right up into right now, these are all leading up to the final, this destruction, not the final destruction, but this destruction that happened that heralded the coming of Christ. And so I have with me, behind me here, I have some beautiful paintings. This is from David Lindsley. This is one that he recreated from the original one that he did, which had a big Mesoamerican temple in the background. He called me up one day and said, what can I do to actually improve this? Because I don't believe that it would happen in Central America anymore, and I don't want to depict things that aren't true. And so he made this one. It has a nice big mound in the background, has the wall with the towers and the pickets and so forth of the wood there, and he has the little children gathered around him. So we're going to be talking about this in the next couple of weeks as we go through the visit of Christ to the Nephites. But again, I want to come back to this for just a second, the ramp up to all this. So in 3rd Nephi now, we're going to go to 3rd Nephi. And in chapter 1, verses 29 and 30 here. So we have, in 3rd Nephi, we have gotten into Laconius and what's going on with that. And in verses 29 and 30 of that, when I focus on this, he says, and there was also cause of much sorrow among the Lamanites, for behold, they had many children who did grow up and began to wax strong in years. And they became for themselves, I think, what does that mean? Basically, they decided that they didn't really need to follow the ways of their parents. They were basically going to go their own direction, and were led away by some who were Zoramites. Now, the Zoramites were, again, they were Nephites, basically, who had originally, they were with the Nephites, and they had split back off again, descendants of Zoram, by their lions and their flattering words to join those Gadianton robbers. So they led the younger generation to follow the false traditions of the Gadianton robbers, which is really, this is a sad state of affairs. I don't know if they were doing it in their universities, but probably their education systems, whatever they were doing with that, was leading their kids to follow false paths or bad paths. And that's where the Lamanites afflicted also, and began to decrease as to their faith and their righteousness because of the wickedness of this rising generation. And as I look at our nation today, brothers and sisters, I see that, we see so many now parents who have their kids. They spend all this money to send them off to college and universities, and they come back as little Marxists and socialists with all kinds of false information about our nation. They don't appreciate the fact that they live in this free country, and many of them despise our founding fathers and the things, the Christianity and so forth that brought this nation up under God. So we see this same thing happening in our day, in our rising generation in this country, who are so coddled and they've never been without anything before in their lives. They haven't gone through the struggles of 2 world wars and other wars that have brought people back to reality as far as what it means to be free and have liberty. So I see that this is the parallels that we're talking about here between these between the Book of Mormon here and our day that we're living in. 3 Nephi chapter 6 now says, and it says that it set at defiance the law and the rights of their country. So they defied the law of their country. If you take a look at what's going on, again, back here to what's happening in the United States today, we have cities who basically just choose not to follow the federal laws. They just call themselves sanctuary cities, and they defy the law and the rights of their country. The law of the country basically also says that we should have borders. Every nation on the earth has borders, but we have some people say, well, we shouldn't have borders. We just have it open borders, and people can come and go as they want to, including terrorists or other people that we can't check to see if they're going to be assimilated into our population or if they're here to cause trouble. They said they did covenant one with another to destroy the governor. Oh my goodness, doesn't this sound like what's been happening the last 3.5 years or so? The governor of the land, the person who won the election, President Donald Trump, basically has had nothing but attacks against him, his administration, and so forth, that have even to an impeachment proceedings held to try to destroy him. But unfortunately, they apparently did not have enough information or have enough evidence that could actually make anything stick. So it's interesting that there's another. Again, they were trying to destroy the governor of the land, and here we have, the certain party trying to destroy the governor of the land of the United States here, and to establish a king over the land, or basically somebody who is going to rule over the land, and that the land should no more be at liberty, but should be subject unto kings. So in other words, not be free, but should be basically subject unto those who want to make the rules, those who are in power. Whether or not, when it comes down to kings, we're not seeing people trying to set up an actual king per se, but basically king means that you have sole power and unlimited power over everything else. This is what happens when you have socialism, basically, because the government becomes the king. The government itself becomes the sole power, and instead of having the people have their rights, instead of the people being where the power of the government comes from, instead it becomes the government itself becomes the power, and that is more like a kingship than a democracy or a republic, which is what we are technically as a republic. So I want to bring up a couple of things I think are just fascinating. This is the ramp up to what we're talking about here. And so this total eclipse thing, I just find this is really fascinating, because if we go basically to the Book of Mormon, let me go back just another little bit here. And in 3rd Nephi here, we're going to go into, you got Laconius. The Gadianton robbers have gotten so bad, it's just terrible. And now we're going to go to on the annotated edition of the Book of Mormon again here. It's on page 383. He talks about Governor Laconius gathers the people in the center of the land, the center of the Nephite lands. Now, if we understand basically that again, according to this geography, the heartland geography, the lands that they're talking about here primarily are Zarahemla and Bountiful, and those two places correspond to essentially Iowa and Ohio. If you have people in Iowa, basically in Ohio, and now the Gadianton robbers have gotten so strong and so powerful that they are literally causing the people to have to move out of their cities. The cities that they built with their own hands, they're having to move out of there, or else they're going to get destroyed. People in places like Chicago and New York and Washington, D.C. and Seattle and Portland and Atlanta may be wanting to think of the same kind of thing. They might want to get out of those cities before they completely are taken over. But that's just a application here as far as getting out of their lands there. In fact, it got so bad actually that this is in chapter 3 of 3rd Nephi, in verse 20. They were going to go up into the mountains and actually go up and destroy these Gadianton robbers, but they were told not to. Said, no, if you go and attack them, you're going to lose. You can only do defensive wars. You can't do offensive wars. And that's a pretty, there have been a couple of offensive wars in over the time of the scriptures, but most of the time God basically demands that his people basically just fight defensive wars. So the center of the land one is kind of an interesting thing, because here again, and we're going to go to, this is on page 384. This is 3rd Nephi chapter 3. And verse 23 says, the land which was appointed was the land of Zarahemla and the land Bountiful, yea, to the line which was between the land Bountiful and the land Desolation. And there were a great many thousand people who were called Nephites, who did gather themselves together in this land. Now Laconius did cause that they should gather themselves together in the land southward, because of the great curse which was upon the land northward. So I think if we kind of take a look at this, you have basically the land of Bountiful, the land of Zarahemla, and they're saying we're going to gather in the center of their lands, which if they're in Ohio and Iowa, that would be basically Illinois. But then the land northward wasn't, there was something with that they basically said that was a curse upon that land northward, so they basically went south. If they went south down into Illinois area, it's interesting, archaeologically, Wayne May and Ryan Fisher, the Nephite Explorer Project and so forth, found some really interesting aspects of that, and we're going to talk about that in just a second. But one of the things I wanted to point out here is that this would be in the center of their lands. They left their major cities, and they actually went there. Now, what did they bring with them? They brought their horses and all of their food. They brought 7 years worth of food and so forth. And they were basically told to prepare for 7 years of famine, 7 years of siege. The Gadianton robbers were going to basically lay siege on the Nephites, and they were told to prepare for 7 years. I think I find that's really fascinating, because 7 years food supply is actually now twice in our scriptures. You have the children of Israel basically, as they went into Egypt, that there was going to be 7 years of famine and then 7 years of plenty, and so Joseph of Egypt basically had them store up extra food every year for 7 years, so they would have food to eat for the 7 years of famine that he saw in his dreams. And the same kind of thing is kind of going on here in the Nephite civilization. They were told to prepare for 7 years. I think that has something to do with the 7-year Shemitah cycle. That we're going to see these 7-year cycles coming up in the next over the next few years, as we see these 3.5-year cycles of the coming of Christ basically back again for the second coming. We see those cycles happening. So I just wanted to point out that this is kind of the general area that they're in. Now, there are different kinds of signs that happen, and there are one of the things that I've had a little bit. Those of you who have been following this information, you know about the national covenant that we talk about. Tim Ballard and I've been talking about this American covenant for many years now. And the American covenant essentially is that there's 4 parts of the covenant that have to do with blessings. They're going to be blessed with the land, posterity, prosperity, and security. And then when they become wicked, then those things are basically revoked in reverse order. So God takes away their security, then He takes away their prosperity, then He takes away their posterity, and then if they still won't humble themselves, then He takes away their land. They're swept off the land. As we understand that aspect of it, then we start to see that we see the 9/11 connection that we've already talked about, being the sign of the revocation of the covenant of security. We see in 2008 the revocation of the covenant of prosperity with the stock market crash and ensuing the national debt going skyrocketing. We see in 2015 the same-sex marriage being approved in all 50 states according to the Supreme Court, and also the refunding of Planned Parenthood, which will again result in about 30 million children being killed before they're born in abortions. And if that's the case, then the next 7-year cycle would end up about 2022. And for a long time, there's another interesting cycle that's going on. We're going to talk about that here in just a second. But it has to do with eclipses. And a lot of people have wondered about these eclipses and what kind of sign is this. Then 2017, there was an eclipse. This is actually this is from quite a long time ago. When they first started to talk about this, it was going to happen on August 21st of 2017. But at the time here on Channel 13, it was 2,608 days away, so several years away. But they were talking about this total solar eclipse, which is going to go over the United States of America, and this is basically the path that it was going to follow. It's going to come basically as the Earth is rotating around, and as the moon goes across the face of it, it's going to come in around Portland, Oregon area, around Salem up there. Then it's going to go across Idaho, Wyoming, Nebraska, and then out through South Carolina, as you can see in this image here. It goes basically almost right over just north of Kansas City, which I think I found was kind of an interesting aspect of it. Then there's another one that's coming up here. We're going to talk about this for just a second here. By the way, this is where where it has a complete blocking out of the sun as the moon comes in front. So that darker stripe there is basically where you have a total eclipse. Everything outside of that will have partial eclipse, but it will be progressively, as you get further and further from that center line, it will be less and less percentage of eclipse happening. But in that center portion there, that's going to be 100% eclipsed. If you know what's just north of Kansas City area, it's Adam-on-the-Amen is there. Okay, where everything basically kind of started with Adam and Eve and so forth. This is kind of what it would look like. Basically, if you were looking from the moon back at the Earth, this is what it looks like here. And then when it gets to a certain point, this is going to be on August 21st, 2017, at 1805 Universal Time. Basically, the moon would cast a shadow which would essentially cover all of North America, from basically the Panama Canal all the way up to the North Pole. And so that's what it's going to look like there. This is a different view of that, showing how that looks basically at that point in time, when the little black dot in the middle there is the center of the moon shadow. So that's basically the center of that the shadow there. And that's basically right over the heartland of America. Interestingly enough, I'll go back to this for just a second. So interestingly enough, the way that these two promised lands have been situated on the earth is that they are actually on opposite sides, not exactly, but pretty close to opposite sides of the earth. So when it's daytime in America, it's nighttime in Israel or Jerusalem, that area. And then conversely, when it's nighttime in the United States, it'll be daytime in Israel. So this is one of the few times when both promised lands are in simultaneous darkness. And so that usually is not a good sign. Okay, that's not a good symbol when it happens. But then we have coming up, though, in 2024, we have the next total eclipse, which is going to be basically going the opposite direction over the United States. And this is showing, again, how that's going to happen. Basically, it's going to come in through basically New Brunswick down through Maine, over Vermont, and then down right over the top of the Hill Cumorah in New York and Palmyra. Then it'll be going right over the top of Kirtland, Ohio. And then it'll be going through Indiana and then right across the bottom corner of Illinois, out through Missouri, and then Arkansas, and then across Texas, and then out through Mexico. So these two, when you see them together, it's going to be April the 8th of 2024. That basically is, you have the August 21st, 2017, and the April 8th, 2024. How many years is that apart from each other? Well, obviously that's 7 years apart from each other. And so that is, again, when you're looking at 7 years things, you need to be paying attention because that has some real interesting symbolism potentially associated with that. In this particular case, I find it just fascinating. If you take a close look at where those two intersect each other, because these are twice when the promised land of America will be blotted out, and America and its cohorts country, basically the other promised land, and Israel are going to be in simultaneous darkness. There's some real foreboding kind of things that can happen here. The 7 years that span between these two, what do those 7 years indicate? What is the symbolism of that? And I want to go back for just a second now to being able to understand a couple of other things. So when it comes down to it, these 7 year cycles that we're talking about with the 9/11, 2008, 2015, and then something happening in 2022, possibly happening, some kind of a sign about being swept off the land. But it's kind of juxtaposed with this 7 year cycle, which is 2017 instead of 2015. And so these are like 2 years off. And for a long time, I was wondering, well, what is going on with those 2 years? Is it, God is not a God of confusion, and his things are so precise that I can't imagine that this would be off just by accident. So I was trying to figure out why is there this juxtaposition of 2 years, and I finally realized that we're talking about two different levels of covenant. We have a global covenant. When the global covenant happens, basically these are things that happen in the stars, in the skies. And these are things that God said he set up for times and for seasons, for signs of what's going to be happening in our humanity here on the earth. But the other one is actually a national covenant. So you have a global covenant, which is signs in the stars, and you have a national covenant, which are things that are happening within our nation, the United States, in this particular case. And so that's, I think, the reason why there's two different timings here. But this 7 year timing is, I think, fascinating because if you go back to where these two actually intersect each other, it's right at this. Now this is showing actually coming right over the top of Rochester area. Okay, and you can see that the Hill Cumorah is just to the east of Rochester there, and go right over Buffalo and then down past Cleveland, and of course Kirtland is just east and north of Cleveland. So this is going to be right in that main shadow area as it goes across here. But this is a closer up of where the two of them actually meet. So the center line is the actual center of where the moon shadow is going to be, and then the other two lines on either side of those are where the 100% eclipse is going to be happening. And if you take a look, basically where those two meet, the closest town to that is called Carbondale. And hopefully you can see here, I'm going to go ahead and move my cursor so you can see. This is the southern tip of Illinois. It kind of looks a little bit like the root of a tooth. You have the Mississippi River going up here on the west side and along the southern part, and then you have the Ohio River, which goes off to the east and basically over here to Paducah, and then you have the Shawnee National Forest as it goes back up to the north and to the east. So it kind of creates this almost like the roots of a tooth at the bottom of Illinois. And a lot of people don't know this, but archaeologically, there's some really interesting things that are going on there. Now, remember, I talked about just briefly that Laconius gathered the Nephites in the center of their lands, and then they went southward. They went to the land southward. If they gather in the center of their lands, basically, and let's go back to this one right here. Again, if you take a look at Ohio, right up here, and then you have Illinois over here, the center of their lands could be in this general area around Indiana or Illinois. If they happen to be a little bit more, since Zarahemla was a bigger city because it was their capital city, maybe they kind of favored that direction a little bit. And if they went south, that basically puts them at the southern tip of Illinois. This would be a great place to go if they're going to try to escape the siege of the Gadianton robbers, because they have river on three sides of them. They would have to only protect the northern part of this along this line here, and if you can see my cursor going along on that. Okay, so basically this area here, and amazingly enough, archaeologically speaking, there are some really fascinating things here. So let me go back to this. So this is where the solar eclipse is happening on April the 8th of 2024. You'll notice the place called Poplar Bluff and Hot Springs. Okay, that's Arkansas. Poplar Bluff is the southern, kind of the Boot Heel region of Missouri, on the southeastern side of Missouri. Basically, and you can see again, it goes right over the southern tip of Illinois here. All right, and so now we're going to go. So that this is Carbondale here, and you can kind of see where Carbondale, the city, is as a satellite image, and this is where the two actually intersect. There's kind of a lake there that looks a little bit like a letter C, with a northern portion, and it kind of goes around kind of like an L with a top piece on it there, and so that you can see where those two happen. And this image here, you can see Carbondale's at the top, and the closest city to this is called Maconda, and it's almost straight down from Carbondale, and it's called Maconda. So that's Makanda. And as you take a look at that, you can see the lake there on the left-hand side of that. This area is pretty much just kind of no man's land out there, west of Maconda. But that's where those two actually come, where those two actually intersect, right in this general area. The thing that I find is fascinating about Maconda is this is really close to, you can see at the very bottom of your screen, you can see Giant City State Park, which is just kind of the words for that are actually kind of to the south, because the park goes to the south, but the park extends up past north up to where that Trillium Trail is located at. And as you take a look at that, all along this area of Illinois, and this is again, this is from page in the annotated Book of Mormon here. You can actually find this image here on page 287. So it's page 287 in the annotated Book of Mormon. This is the bottom portion of that, and it shows this, archaeologically speaking, there was a series of forts that go all along from the east to the west and back from east and west and back. About 43 of these ancient fortifications that were spanning the southern tip of Illinois. So you would literally have the river on three sides of you, and you only had to defend one other side. Now that across there is about 60 miles or so, and that's why it takes about 43 fortifications to span that area. They were far enough apart that they could actually send signals to each other. They are actually within line of sight of each other, so they could literally send messages back and forth across the entire southern tip of Illinois here, to let each other know if there was an attack coming from any people from the north. The reason why the rivers are such a good defense is because they're nearly a mile wide at these points. So you can't just sneak up on people with the rivers there, because you can see huge swaths of the river. They're very wide. You could see somebody paddling across the river for, an hour before they got there, and it would take thousands and thousands of canoes, basically full of people, to try to come over and attack the Nephites in that southern tip. There are stone walls that are there. For example, you have the stone wall there at what's called Stone Fort. That's on the upper right-hand image. And then you also have places like Pounds Hollow, which is further over to the east side there. Turns out that there's a very large, in fact, I can show you this. There's an escarpment basically that goes along this whole area in the Shawnee National Forest. Very, very remote area out here. There's all these cliffs, and it was along these cliffs, on the tops of these cliffs, where these fortifications were discovered over the last about 15 or 20 years. Now, the people who were there many, many years ago, a lot of them were moonshiners and so forth that were in the area there, because this is pretty remote. But they've actually found all kinds of things. If you've been with us for a long time and you've seen the Nephite Explorer TV series that Ryan Fisher did, you'll be able to see they actually go out there and they have a couple of episodes where they find actually secret entrances into these areas, and these areas were highly fortified with stone walls and so forth, just like we're seeing in the images there. This is another image there. This is from Jonathan Neville, one of the pictures that he took there at this place. But you can just see about 100 to 80 to 100 foot tall cliffs that they could have up. They could stay up on top of there, and basically any Lamanites or any enemies trying to get up into there, they had all those entrances basically fortified so they could not get up there and harass them. And it's just really a fascinating place. I just find it really, really amazing. This is a stone wall here, just for a second here. Sorry about that. Another one. This is again from Stone Fort, but these were ancient walls that were built up. And of course, in the Book of Mormon, they do talk about having walls of stone. They just don't happen to be talking about any buildings made out of stone or any kind of cities made out of stone. They talked about them being made out of wood primarily, and occasionally they had cement on that wood. Interestingly enough, though, this area, and I want to go back here for just a second. This is, I think, one of the main points I wanted to make. Isn't it interesting that the place where these two eclipses that basically span a 7-year cycle, that the place where those intersect, the exact epicenter of those things, is right in the exact same place where, if our geography is correct, this is where Laconius gathered the righteous Nephites together so they could make a 7-year stand against the Gadianton robbers. They left their homes, they came into this area, and so if X marks this spot, it's really fascinating to me that it happens to be going right exactly over the area where the Nephites had gathered together with their 7-year supplies to be prepared for a 7-year siege by the Gadianton robbers. I think that's fascinating. But now we're going to get into the next part of this. We're going to actually utilize work that has been done back in 2011 and the presentations that we did at our conference, and so we're going to utilize that. But let's now go ahead and jump on over here. I want to show this image though. This is I just did this just before we recorded this podcast. These are earthquakes that have happened in the last 2 years, since 2018 and 2019 and what we have of 2020 so far. There's a total of 737 events that happened on this in this map, and as you can see, they're all clustered around this area of Missouri, and you can see what's called Poplar Bluff there in the image. Just south and east of Poplar Bluff, there is a very active seismic zone, even to this very day. And this is what we're going to be talking about here in the next in the next about hour and 20 minutes or so as we watch the video of this. I think what you're going to find is something just absolutely fascinating about this. Now, the last couple of things I just want to point out. This is when Captain Moroni took his coat, took a piece thereof, and he wrote upon it the title of liberty. I just want to reiterate the fact that this is what we're talking about here in our day. In memory of our God, our religion, and our freedom, and our peace, and our wives, and our children. There are those in our country who want to basically tear down every single one of those things, and they're very open about it now. They want to destroy all religion, that religious people are bigots and have real issues. They want to destroy our freedom. They want to basically have it so that they can have control. They can tell us everything that we can or cannot do. That the government will control every business, every entity, all the natural resources, and basically the people become the slave to the government rather than the people giving the power to the government. They want to destroy our peace through riots and looting and lawlessness. Taking away their wives, basically to not even have wives, not even have marriage, not even have nuclear families. Black Lives Matter, that's one of their tenets. And the fourth tenet, as I understand it, is to destroy the nuclear family because that's racist, because having a mother and a father in conjunction with having children and having them be committed 100% to each other is basically something that they want to tear down because they feel like it's racist. And it says, and also our children. So all of these things are currently under attack in the United States today. And this is, I think, the reason why Captain Moroni rent his coat, realized that their nation was about to succumb to evil and to apostasy, and then he wrote these things on his coat to what? To remind them of the things that are the most important, and to remind them that if they do not stand and fight for these things, if they do not basically do all in their power to uphold their God, their religion, their freedom, and their peace, and their wives and their children, that these things will be taken from them by those who have a different agenda. In fact, I love this image here of the title of liberty. This is again by David Lindsley. And if you take a close look at it, you can actually, you should be able to actually read that. Those actually are characters from the gold plates, according to the Anthem transcript. It says, in memory of our God, our religion, our freedom, and our peace, and our wives and our children. And we thought it would be appropriate to have it on Hebrew broadcloth, which is a red and white striped cloth, which is the natural, which is the kind of the most common cloth in the Hebrew culture. And interestingly enough, it looks a lot like the Star-Spangled Banner. It came to pass that when he had poured out his soul to God, he named all the land which was south of the land desolation, yea, and find all the land both on the north and the south, a chosen land, and the land of liberty. And again, we have President Nelson actually talking about this land of liberty being the United States of America, and so did Elder L. Tom Perry and others. Moroni said unto them, behold, we are a remnant of the seed of Jacob, yea, we are a remnant of the seed of Joseph, whose coat was rent by his brethren to many pieces. Yea, and now, behold, let us remember to keep the commandments of God. There's Moroni admonishing the Nephites to keep the commandments of God. And just like Captain Moroni, I think that our leaders of the church would also admonish us to keep the commandments of God. Behold, whosoever will maintain this title upon the land, let him come forth in the strength of the Lord and enter into a covenant, that they may maintain their rights and their religion, that the Lord God may bless them. And then now this is a really important, and I think this is apropos for all of us as members of the true church, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. In 2 Chronicles, the Lord said, if my people, which are called by my name. So who are the people who are called by his name? I think it's us. If we will humble ourselves and pray and seek his face and turn from our wicked ways, he says, then I will hear from heaven and will forgive their sin and heal their land. I love this promise by the Lord, that if we will turn from our wicked ways and hear what he has taught and what our prophets are telling us, then he will forgive our sins and will heal our nation and our country and the world as far as that's concerned. But I think that's going to happen when he returns. So going back to a couple of other things. So I want to address now directly, this is in, we're now in 3rd Nephi, and we've gotten to the point where we're in 3rd Nephi chapter 8, which is where we're actually, this is all the setup for what is happening in chapter 8. Now, what I'm going to do is just give you a very brief overview, and then we're going to have you be able to watch for the first time an entire video. It's a DVD that was done back. In fact, I'm going to open this up here. This is actually from the Book of Mormon Evidence set of DVDs. This is the second set, so this is number 2, Book of Mormon Evidence number 2. This is the one that has the Phoenicia expedition and the destruction at the time of Christ's death, which we're talking about now. Book of Mormon Metallurgy, the Hebrew in the Heartland, Ancient Alphabetic Scripts, and Serpent Mound Secrets, and Iron Age America. So these are the things that are talking about that. But in disc number 2 of this, it's called What Caused the Destruction at the Time of Christ. This was actually done at our National Book of Mormon Evidence Conference on May the 13th and 14th of 2011. So we've known about this for quite some time, but it's such a paradigm changer that only people who have bought the set actually know about this. And it's just so critical that we understand this, because this has been one of the big things that have been used actually to try to be naysaying the Heartland model geography for the Book of Mormon. In fact, I'll give you a quick example here, and in the DVD it actually talks about other things here. But this is actually a book that's called The Geology of the Book of Mormon by Jerry D. Grover Jr., and he's talking about the geology, basically the rocks and so forth, the continental things. And he makes an assumption in his book on about page 77, the beginning of chapter 6. He calls it the volcano-only scenario. He says, in order to begin correlating 3rd Nephi events to locations on the ground, there are 3 potential primary hazards to consider that will drive all of the secondary hazards and damage: volcanic activity, earthquake activity, and large storms and hurricanes. At the outset, in evaluating all of the events described in 3rd Nephi, it is apparent that a volcano is an essential element, as there is really no other reasonable explanation for the mist and vapor of darkness that was widespread in the land northward and the land southward. So basically, what he's saying is that the events that we're about to talk about here in 3rd Nephi chapter 8 can only be explained by a volcanic eruption of some sort. And of course, if you go to the heartland of America, there are no volcanoes there, at least none that happened in the time frame of Jesus Christ and his death. So they said, well, there you go. That basically ends the story for the Heartland model geography. The only problem is he's making a very, very false assumption here, that the only explanation, apparently he is not aware of the fact that in the Heartland of America is this thing called the New Madrid fault system. And in 1811 and 1812, this let go with the largest sequence of earthquakes ever recorded in human history. Over 2,000 events over a 5-month time frame. That averages about 17 earthquakes per day, and 3 of these earthquakes were like an 8.0 or larger magnitude, which are 10 times larger than the earthquakes that destroyed San Francisco back in 1906. I'm going to show you that basically his assumption here, the primary assumption he's making, and wrote this entire beautiful book about, his primary assumption is fatally flawed. There is other ways of explaining it. And in fact, there are things that happened in 3rd Nephi here that cannot be explained directly by a volcanic eruption. So I hate to have to put that one down, but that's the way that one is. Now, the information that we're going to be sharing with you over the next hour and a half or so is basically coming from a lot of different books, but primarily this is one of the earlier books here. It's called The New Madrid Earthquake, a Scientific Factual Field Account by Myron Fuller. This is called The New Madrid Fault Finder's Guide. This is kind of a funny, Dr. Ray Knox and Dr. David Stewart, they have a kind of a sense of humor, so they call it the Fault Finder's Guide. So if you want to find faults about Missouri, this is where you go to find the faults. There's another book they wrote called The Earthquake That Never Went Away. The shaking stopped in 1812, but the impact goes on. 150 photos and figures on how the great New Madrid earthquakes affect you today by, again, this Dr. David Stewart and Dr. Ray Knox. Combined, they have over 60 years of research on the New Madrid seismic zone. But I'm really going to focus a lot of attention on this one right here. This is called The Earthquake America Forgot. 2,000 tumblers in 5 months. And again, this is by Dr. David Stewart and Dr. Ray Knox. This one has many, many different accounts. I'm just going to share with you one of these accounts. This is from page 237. This is the reason why I was actually at New Madrid. There in New Madrid, Missouri, there is a earthquake museum that's just fabulous. If you ever get down to the area around New Madrid, you got to go look it up. My friend Jeff is there, He runs that, and basically we took a tour down there, and we had these folks that came. You're going to see this again in the video, so I'm just going to make it really, really quick. But basically, picked up this book that just happened to just almost fall open to this particular page, and I looked at this page, and it said earthquake smog. Earthquake smog. Now, I've done a lot of scientific research, and I've never heard of something called earthquake smog before. But this is what it says just very briefly. It says, during the duration of the disturbances and throughout the New Madrid region, people reported the darkening of the skies following the largest shocks. Clear nights became overcast while clear days became dark and gloomy. Eliza Bryan described her family's experience on December the 16th when the first shock struck. She said, "My ma tried to light the lamps, but the darkness was so dense, they didn't help at all." Does that sound familiar? She also spoke of the, quote, the awful darkness of the atmosphere, unquote, during some of the daylight shocks. Godfrey Lesueur said that following the severe shocks, quote, a dense black cloud of vapor overshadowed the land, unquote. Another resident of New Madrid said that when a large shock occurred, quote, the air would be clear at first, but in 5 minutes it would become very black, and this darkness returned at each successive shock, unquote. Another New Madrid observer noted that, quote, a vapor seemed to impregnate the atmosphere, had a disagreeable smell, and produced difficulty of respiration, unquote. And a minister living near Cape Girardeau, which is close to the New Madrid epicenter, reported that from December the 16th until December the 19th, how many days is that? It's about 3 days, said the sun, moon, and stars were concealed by a mist and a fog, which dropped like a heavy dew. Now, there's more to this, but what you're going to find out, my brothers and sisters, is that these accounts of what happened between 1811 and 1812, which, by the way, just happened to be how many years before the first vision. So what we have here is a situation where we have a massive New Madrid event, and in the DVD, it will show you through Martisha Tuttle. She's a paleoseismologist with USGS. And she has found direct evidence, in-the-ground evidence, that a similar event did in fact happen right near the time of Christ. There are 28 observations. In fact, I'm going to encourage you. We're going to get this up on the website so you can actually download this. This is a worksheet. It's called "What Caused the Destruction at the Time of Christ in the Book of Mormon." This worksheet was done back in 2011, updated in 2017. But there are observations made in the Book of Mormon here in 3 Nephi chapter 8. We're not going to go through those because we'll do this in the DVD. But basically in chapter 8, a couple of points I do want to make that it says it was this is in verse 2. Now it came to pass, if there was no mistake by this man in the reckoning of our time, the 33rd year had passed away, and the people began to look with great earnestness for the sign which had been given by the prophet Samuel the Lamanite. Yea, from the time that there should be darkness for the space of 3 hours over the face of the land. And there began to be great doubtings and disputations among the people, notwithstanding so many signs had been given. And it came to pass in the 34th year. So what year was it again? The 34th year, first month, 4th day of the month. That's when there arose a great storm, like such as one that had never been known in all the land. There's great and terrible tempest and thunder, and we're going to get into all of that in the DVD. But it turns out that there are 28 observations made by the prophet Nephi in the Book of Mormon that talk specifically about the physical destruction. Why did he put all this detail in here if we didn't want to know about it, or if we didn't need to know about it? I think everything he put in here was important, so if he put it in here, there was a reason for it. Why did he put so much information about this? And I personally believe that the reason is because what you're going to find out is out of those 28 observations that he makes in the Book of Mormon, this is things like the earth is carried up upon a city, whirlwinds quaking of the whole earth, highways broken up, level land spoiled, rocks rent in twain, mists of darkness, 3 days of darkness. All of these different things were things that they actually experienced and observed, and then wrote these things down in their history. And Mormon, as he's going through this history, almost 350 years later, he picks these things out, and he put all of this detail in here, and I think it's for a reason. Mormon and Moroni basically said that they saw our day, that Jesus Christ has shown them our day. So I think that they put this in here for a reason. I think the reason is because this, I believe, makes it crystal clear that the Book of Mormon actually happened here in North America, because what you're going to see, folks, is that we're going to take those 28 observations made from the Book of Mormon. We're going to go through those in detail. Then we're going to compare those with these books and a couple of other documentaries. One of the documentaries is called The Earthquake in the Heartland by the History Channel. I'm going to play that for you here.
The biggest earthquake ever to hit the lower 48 states was not the 6.7 Northridge quake in 1994, or the 6.9 Loma Prieta quake in 1989, or even the 7.8 San Francisco quake of 1906. But the series of 3 quakes which struck near St. Louis in 1811 and 1812. The earth didn't just shake, it discharged bizarre sand geysers, spewed strange vapors, made the Mississippi River run backwards, and sucked lakes dry.
All of a sudden, the hand of God comes down and strikes right where you're at.
For many, it seemed to be the end of the world.
These people were scared to death.
But it wasn't over. Thousands of aftershocks rattled the continent for 5 more months.
They rang church bells in Boston. They rattled China in New York. They were felt in Detroit. They were felt in Washington, D.C.
What if that same earthquake were to strike the Midwest today? The lives of at least 11 million Americans would be in peril.
The problem today is that what was an unpopulated part of America is now very populated.
It's happened before. It will happen again.
That's just a very brief little introduction to what we're about to talk about. I think you're going to find that this is one of the most amazing bits of information that you're going to have seen for many, many years when it comes down to the Book of Mormon and having a paradigm change. So again, most of the time people have thought, well, it's got to be some kind of a volcanic eruption, but there's nothing in the Book of Mormon that says anything about a volcano or ash or magma or lava or explosions or rivers of fire or falling rocks or things like that, or rumbling even, that talks about that. What it does talk about, every single thing. It turns out, I don't want to be a, to tell you the end here too quickly. Don't want to be a spoiler, but I'll just put it this way. If out of those 28 things that the prophet Nephi actually observed in the Book of Mormon and put it into the text, if 3/4 of those things were actually witnessed and we could actually verify those things, that would be truly significant. But what if we could get all of them? What if all 28 of the observations made by the prophet Nephi matched up precisely with people's observations that happened in 1811 and 1812? Then you're going to have to watch the rest of this to find out the answer to that. So, but basically, so I think you're going to have some really exciting things to know about. Now, if you already have the this book, basically, which is Exploring the Book of Mormon in America's Heartland, many people have that. We have about 50-something thousand copies out there. If you go to pages 188 and 189 and 190 and 191, or excuse me, 190, this also has kind of a general overview of this information. But brothers and sisters, this is what I find really fascinating. And also, of course, in the annotated Book of Mormon, here on page 393, it talks about the tempests and the whirlwinds. Where do whirlwinds happen? Whirlwinds don't happen in Central America. at least not any kind of category 2 or 3 or greater than that. Winds sufficient that could pick up a person and carry them away is not in there. In fact, that's one of the things I do. It's not in the DVD, so I do want to mention this particular thing here. On May the 11th of 2011, a massive Category EF5 tornado near the town of Joplin, Missouri, sucked an 18-year-old boy from the sunroof of his dad's SUV. It was a SUV, or it was an SUV. Okay, anyway. Through the sunroof, authorities later found him some distance from where the vehicle was shattered. There was another individual that actually got sucked from his living room, and they found his body many miles away from his home. It actually had lifted his body up and held it aloft for that long as it traveled along, and then dropped his body off in a lake that was found later. And in 3 Nephi chapter 8, it says, "There were some who were carried away in the whirlwind, and whether they know, no man knoweth, say they were carried away." So if you will take a look at the annotated Book of Mormon, devastating tornadoes capable of literally carrying people away, as described in 3 Nephi, occur seasonally in what is termed Tornado Alley of North America's heartland. The whirlwind could mean tornado. A whirlwind could mean tornado is understood. Whirlwinds are mentioned 7 times in the Book of Mormon. In 2 Nephi, in Mosiah, in Alma, Helaman, and 3 Nephi, and then also in 3 Nephi chapter 10, they were not carried away in the whirlwind. To be carried away implies a lifting force along with the winds, such as found in strong tornadoes. So these are not a little dust devil, which I've seen a couple of dust devils have happened in Central America, but the conditions for the formation of large, devastating tornadoes doesn't even exist in Central America. It only happens here in North America in what it is ironically called Tornado Alley. An EF4 tornado has winds in the 200 to 250 mile per hour range. Humans can easily become airborne at that force. An EF5 tornado is roughly in the 250 to 300 mile per hour range. People have been known to be carried a mile away by severe tornadoes. No one has ever been known to survive a tornado journey of that distance. That's from the Tornado Project Online. It says, while EF4 and EF5 tornadoes occur approximately once a year in the United States, they are unknown in Mesoamerica. This is from Missouri Storm Aware. An average of 1,000 tornadoes hit the United States every year. Only 0.1% of all tornadoes achieve an EF5 status. And then it says, behold, there was a great and more terrible destruction of the land northward, for behold, the whole face of the land was changed, because the tempests and the whirlwinds and the thunderings and the lightnings and the exceedingly great quaking of the whole earth. So these are some of the primary things that we're going to talk about in this DVD. I want to note for you on page 395 in the annotated Book of Mormon, we have some direct correlations and comparisons between eyewitness accounts that happened in 1811 and 1812 and 3 Nephi chapter 8 accounts brought to us by the prophet Nephi, the Book of Mormon. I think you will find those to be absolutely astounding how similarly they correlate. On page 396 in the annotated Book of Mormon, you will see the New Madrid earthquake overlay. Based on the geography of the Book of Mormon and from the Heartland research, basically this was a destruction that was custom made just for them. The Nephites, i.e. the Hopewell Mound Builder people, would have been right in these river valleys. You can actually see on page 396, it has the red zone is basically where the strongest, most devastating shaking would have gone on. The yellow zone is where the earthquakes would have been felt, but not necessarily would have been as devastating. And as you can see, it kind of forms almost a V shape. The reason why it's a V shape is because it's the bottom of that where the New Madrid seismic zone is, and the earthquakes tenuate up the river valleys, so that they actually follow the valleys. As that energy is released from the earthquakes, it follows the two valleys up, and that's what causes it as it goes up the Ohio River Valley and up the Mississippi River Valley, and just shakes them to their very cores. And so you'll actually see some interesting stuff. It says there was great and terrible destruction in the land southward, but it was even worse in the land northward, because as it tenuates northward, it actually spreads out, and so the destruction is actually even more broadly happening in the northern part of this area. It talked about in 3rd Nephi, it talks about cities being burned. Many cities were burned. 3rd Nephi chapter 8 and chapter 9, and there's and Mormon 5 and so forth. Even the Jaredites in Ether have cities that are burned. Cities made out of stone, folks, don't burn. Rock doesn't burn very well. I'm an Eagle Scout, and I know that rocks do not burn very well. Okay. These cities had to be rebuilt. So people have said, well, but they had little wooden structures on top of like in Chichen Itza and so forth, which, by the way, wasn't even built until about 900 AD. But long after the Nephites were long gone. But the bottom line is that they say, well, it could have been burned off the top of that, but it wouldn't burn the entire thing down. You wouldn't have to rebuild the pyramid because the little top house got burned. This is where cities were burned to the ground, basically, which is indicative of people who were building their homes out of wood, which of course we know was what the primary building material of the Nephites was. So that's basically the gist of what I wanted to share with you. Now we're going to go to, I hope you enjoy this. Now, this was recorded some time ago, so you're going to see a younger me with probably had some hair and so forth there. But I think you're going to really enjoy this. Like I said, when people have seen this, they have said that it is one of the biggest game changers. There is no reason to assume that a volcano is even necessary or even was any part of this destruction that happened around the time of Christ, and contrary to what has been assumed by Mesoamerican theorists for a long, long time. You can download this worksheet off of the website, so we'll give you some information on that. And I hope you enjoy the DVD, and we're going to go to it now. Thank you so much, everybody. Enjoy that.
Find the new virtual expo at bookofmormonevidencestreaming.com. We advertise 60 new videos, but actually almost double that amount, so you'll have plenty of inspiration to carry you through the fall and into the holiday season. Don't miss out on more than 110 new videos now in our library. Special guest speakers are Glenn Beck, David Barton, and Tim Ballard. You'll have access for 3 whole months, as well as receiving 2 bonuses that will offset your complete subscription cost. The first is The Destruction of Christ's Death, which is a 2-hour streaming video by Rod Meldrum, which is a $20 value, as well as his new 40-page ebook called Prophecies and Promises. What Did Joseph Know? That's a $15 value. We're excited for you to join us.
Oh, baby. Okay, that's much better. Okay.